Hello, my lovely, inspiring human potential community. In this universal energy transmission session, we will be clearing charged emotional and mental patterns around the ego. Regular listeners know that the ego self is something we use interchangeably. In fact, when we look at the psychoanalytical definition of the ego, it is the self. The ego is the portion of the human personality which is experienced as the self or I and is in contact with the external world through perception. I'm reading from Britannica. It's said to be a part that remembers, evaluates, plans, and in other ways is responsive to and acts in the surrounding physical and social world. Obviously, there's other components to it, but the part that I wanted to share as we will look to bring that inner growth mindset, journey, and lifestyle approach. So it's about you being able to unconditionally love the ego self of you, to achieve heart, mind, body, 5D and beyond frequency with what is you. Even though the world outside has different ways of talking about it, this is the very place where to be self-empowered means you are taking complete ownership. To take complete ownership, you want to realize the emotions behind words that are part of our journey and that really are directed, as long as we don't tend to the emotion and mental charge, by our child self, because we did begin evolving, or others would use wiring, begin having a pattern of behavior, which again the lovely psychiatrist that I get to learn information from can talk about in extensive ways of that default network, the nervous system, and how it engages. And so there's a whole technical body component behind what others will instead only use stories. In fact, I will share with you a tidbit of the esoteric sciences story about the ego and then relate it back to our lovely mammalian heritage, the psychoeducation that has given me the knowledge of why we have feelings the way they do, and then I come and share with you in different ways. And I'm sharing it before we begin the session so that you can just have a little bit of information to think about on your own, following it, and just as the days move forward, and to transform entirely your relationship with the word ego. For unfortunately, there's a lot of negative that at least I've witnessed and still see when I use the word with people, like, oh no, but I'm not in my ego, I'm not egotistic, I'm not, a lot of no, versus we all have one, and it's actually the self, which is part of us, and it's just us being us, and we can actually explore it and bring something beautiful when you're, one, accepting it, so you're not creating resistance with yourself. Accepting it doesn't mean it has to stay the same. So here, the ego is not coextensive with either the personality or the body, although body concepts form the core of early experiences of self. This is always Britannica, the psychoanalytical definition. The ego, once developed, is capable of change throughout life, particularly under conditions of threat, illness, and significant changes in life circumstances. The newborn human infant reacts to, but cannot control, anticipate, or alter sources of stimulation, be they external or internal. So here they're exploring the ego development. At this stage, perception is primitive and diffuse, motor activity is gross and uncoordinated, and we're not going to read anymore. We all remember that we all have a default network, so we'll leave that at that, to remember that we have an infant ego. And really, as long as emotionally we're not in neutrality when we're reacting with our own ego self, we're still using an emotional response that is in that category of child versus sense of safety that comes with the functional adult. So using your lovely prefrontal cortex and not engaging in the reaction, but saying, okay, wait, I'm getting upset. Let me handle this first. And then using your words to continue to share with people and or situations. This is where we are wired as they share. So our brain has a habit because it creates neural pathways, neural networks, neural pathways, and it takes about 21 days, is one of the articles I've seen, to change a habit. I don't prefer using the word change because your core stays what it is, and or really if you want to get to master and be all of you. It's about accepting you. So anytime you're trying to actually change, quote unquote, something, it means you're already saying you're a bad thing and I don't want you. And that creates a specific type of relationship which doesn't get you to the 5D and beyond with that trait, which is ownership. This is a trait that is a part of me. I can learn to be an adult with it. I can learn to share it. I can learn also to take it away. And in one of these sessions, I believe I shared with you how I'm very talkative. And I've learned, thanks to the feedback, how to try and engage to the best of my ability, which means sometimes I get it right, sometimes I get it wrong. Quote unquote, it's for the other people that I get it wrong. But for me, it's who I am, or I'm very lovable. Sometimes it's okay. Sometimes people have had things to say, not very kind. But either way, I learn from those experiences. So we can always work with ourselves when there is an ego self-worth, which involves your complete self-compassion, your complete unconditional love, neutrality. It is the reason we're working particularly with the word ego, because people think of ego, I don't have one, or it's egotistical. There's a charged state that is not neutral. Now here's the other part. Stories don't help that. The esoteric sciences talk about how the ego developed. I have only a brief sentence here to share with you. The collective trauma to the psyche is actually how the ego, in the form that we know it in, was birthed. So this person who's sharing tidbits on avatar consciousness, oneness consciousness, gives this snippet, and then they don't have an updated video for me to see. But the part of it being a story is where I want you to understand it's not good or bad. Collective trauma, the psychiatrists talk about it. Epigenetics actually has a way that it does trace when our ancestors have gone through something, how it passes down the genes. There's also science that talks about how after, I forget how many years, this was something I got from another video, somebody stated there's so many years before it actually, so something in our genes does go away. So again, science has ways that it's showing and giving us information. Not everybody is very fond of learning technical verbiage information, and they go to other places. And to make a long story short, I was watching a documentary on Unexplainable, and 2 of the episodes, they have the science that shares why these places have horrible things happening. And the person, instead, the show is created to talk about evil, and so they keep on ending every episode with, no, it's an evil entity, versus what the science shows, which is that sound. There's a specific type of sound and something that the ear, even though we can't hear it, but it's affecting our physiology, and it can then create a pressure, and it sends the brain kind of crazy. And the first was also something similar, the geomagnetic core. So the energy from the earth creates a situation in the brain which has an impact on why so many people are going to this place. And I'm not specifying what it is on purpose, but the part that I found again most, and I want to say fascinating, but it's not. It's the perpetuation of narratives that keep people in this duality and in thinking of something in a story format of good versus bad, instead of the science is actually showing to you what is causing the physiology of these people to have an effect. And in a documentary, you're actually just creating the drama. That reminds me of Dr. Joe Dispenza when he talks about the, I think it's the limbic system he mentions, and people engaging in it because that's how there's feeling with the drama. Now, moving away from any blanket statements, we have a mammalian heritage, so we have an attachment defensive state. Our brain does work a certain way, and the engaging in behavior sooner than later has its history in how we're used to defending ourselves. Now that we're gaining information on the nervous system, luckily, the psychoeducation is going to share more and more on why our behavior in any way, shape, or form is what it is. So even though people may not be on board with the technical components yet, it's arriving, and the whole evil medieval eventually will be something that science will have enough of their data to say, here it is, because right now it's just the beginning. Either way of what humanity is doing, back to our focus, for purposes of your personal journey, let yourself choose if you want to allow flexibility, okay? Because obviously everybody has the charged states. So the charged states keep you in a body that is not at ease. And as those who regularly have been watching the sessions, these are meant to help you to gain a sense of ease. As an energy healer, during this session, I will be channeling universal love energy through me into you. If you are open and receptive to this universal love energy, which is always sent for your highest and best good, that will be channeled through me into you, please give your consent. You can state it out loud or in your mind, yes, that you are open and receptive. If you're not open and receptive, just say no. It's an intelligent energy. It knows automatically anyways. But so I am now connected to those of you energetically who have been open and receptive and said yes. And I would like you all to take a minute to breathe so that we can calm our body. And the breathing is our lovely rhythmic breathing, which can be a 5-second inhale and 6-second exhale. Found actually a YouTube video that gives the heart rhythmic breathing for 5 minutes. And I know I've been sharing with you that I prefer natural breathing, but I did notice a difference in my abdomen, a relaxation state. So FYI, it does actually make a very big difference. When you can just acknowledge it within your own body, you're going to help yourself to learn that sense of ease. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get you to be in an inner growth mindset, so that neutrality, looking at things in the twos, and then engaging in your ventral vagal state. So from your body, you're safe. From your mind, you're safe. You're simply acknowledging that you're going to take a look at emotions and thought patterns around a specific topic. And again, right now we're focusing on the ego self and your worth, so worth of it. And I'm asking for you to identify both those things that you are not appreciative of, the things you are, to keep them there, because it's not about negating either or, but to feel I'm in a safe space, this is part of me, and to actually start identifying the feelings and the negative thought patterns and or positive thought patterns, and to allow those to sit and be, because we're not negating any part of you. This is the whole part and point. We're trying to get you to embrace all of you, and you work with the emotions, all of them. Obviously, the feel good emotions are not the ones that are going to keep you up at night or keep you rigid and not in a ventral vagal state. That's the whole part. It's the emotions that you're upset that are the ones who keep you in a defensive state. So the body is hyper or hypo aroused, or it's just not at ease. Now that you're breathing, I want you to clear the mind of anything that is charged in a bad way or good way. So to be neutral again, to try and be open to things, to get rid of anything that is kind of like a critic, and to allow yourself to be comfortable with this exploration with the ego self. Again, you do want to identify what's coming up, what you want your body to be at ease, and let the universal love energy flow and give you even more of that lovely ease, which I'm always hoping you feel more and more, especially those of you who are regularly taking the sessions. Okay, now that we're relaxed, also remember, before we get into this lovely exploration, a little bit of that with your ego and self-worth, that everything and everyone that surrounds you has an impact on your life. So your support system is of the utmost importance to your higher consciousness expansion potential. If you are looking to be a completely self-empowered individual in that enlightenment state, that is an option. Not everybody will choose that. If you're using time and energy to explain yourself, well, that's abundance going to others and things that aren't actually expanding you. You're using your energy You're using your emotions. You're using those moments to explain and fight for yourself, essentially. That's not expansion. That's a stale mate of sorts. And so allow yourself to remember the people who instead you expand with. They're the ones who help you to contemplate, the ones who help you to feel safe and okay, that you can elaborate on. Expansion isn't about somebody telling you yes, yes. It's a feeling where you are completely unconditionally loved with those vices and those virtues. It's home. It's safe. It's blissful. They have genuine interest for your growth. Their ego, their self, is not interested in the outcome. You can always tell that they're interested in how and what makes you happy. You can tell because we're all people. We all have the body that feels these aspects from our nervous system because it's connected to that, as my lovely psychiatrists, psychologists are keeping on teaching me. Luckily, thank you for that. It's the kneecabum.com website for anybody who wants to get their own information. They have many classes. Recently, they've got one on the please and appease defense mechanism. So, enough about that. We're relaxed. We're good. Energy. Now I want you to look at the lovely Shaman's Dream Oracle cards. I gave 2 the focus, and really what I want us to look at is them together. Because while the one with the vanishing mirror, ego sublimation, is not the actual where we're headed, because it's a shattering mirror versus a whole mirror, but the card has some important meaning to it because it's trying to share with us how your self-definition, which you've carried, your identity, is connected to an emotion. So it may be a bit rigid. You may be confining yourself to this definition that you've given yourself time and time again when you began telling yourself who you were as a child, not an adult. And then your neural networks, your stories kept building in the same pattern. But look what's right next to it. This is the beloved radical acceptance. This is a heart, a fiery heart. And here's where we're wanting to unconditionally love and accept all of what the ego self of you is. And instead of shattering, so we're not going to banish the mirror. What we want to do is allow you to see what is it that you feel is shattered and or don't want, or it's in this confined space that just feels confined. And those confinements, whether they be labels, so pick something that makes you feel rigid and fixed and like prison, but not a bad prison. It's just like you can't feel yourself being expressed. Okay, I want you to feel into that with the ego self. And I use the word worth for self-worth, but really I'm trying to say let your knowledge of worth be that you exist, and as you are, you're good. Those traits that you don't prefer, okay, you can work on them. What you want to get yourself to be in first is the sense of ease. So explore the emotion. Focus on an aspect, whatever came up. It can be a person, a situation, it can be you, whatever came up. Even though we're working with the ego mind, it can involve external things because your ego self is always exchanging with the external, right? So there could be something you can think, oh, this is where my ego presented itself. I don't like this. This is what happened in this case because of the ego self of me. So pick something that again creates this way, or I could have done in this context something more. But the ego self of me, my character trait, didn't. Okay, and allow room for exploring where the feeling is, what the feeling is. Also, now that we have that, what's the narrative? When things like this happen, where the ego self of you is engaged in a way that you see doesn't bring the full expression of you, doesn't bring harmony, what thoughts come to your mind? Are you somebody who is working with yourself, or are you just the inner critic? Which is something people are used to. Good guy, bad guy. This is the narrative, not exploring that their inner critic was a child and then a teenager and then a person who was immature, physiologically, there's a whole development between even the depth of our receptors. I think it's 16 and beyond that we actually start to perceive more awareness of what like actual danger is, something along those lines. So remembering you are a body, heart and mind, the body part is what is making up the heart and mind. And so break it down to remembering that those stories, those critics began way back when. So are you your best partner, or are you somebody who's criticizing yourself? Okay, and how does that help to transform the situation? Not to mention, where's the love for you? Is there even understanding for you? And then the external, if there's involving other people, do you blame? Are you somebody who's pointing a finger and blaming? That's all conflict right there. That's not growth. Identify these two areas. Now that we identify feelings, thoughts, and you're like, okay, these don't have to be boxed in a rigid definition of my ego self or of another or of the interaction. They don't need to be told with a storyline of good and bad, because that's not going to get me anywhere, not emotionally and not mentally. You're going to stay in a very specific charged state, and you're going to repeat that pattern over and over and over again, which is why people are subject to their emotions and mind. They're not choosing to pause, own, and then choose. So I'm asking all of that in this moment, and with unconditional love and neutrality towards you and the external, because things happen. We did a session on the unknown. That's all, things happen. Now it's about owning and then deciding what comes next. For the trait, what is it about this trait that you really want to disengage from? And it won't be the trait. It'll be something different. Either it'll be that trait that people maybe tease you about, they don't like about, there's a reaction about, so it leads us to rejection or not acceptance. This is our mammalian heritage, that attachment defensive state. I'm not being accepted for who I am. I'm needing to fight, which is why your support system is important, because that's how you're going to expand and not fight, but get to learn about this ego self trait. Embracing it doesn't mean, again, that you impose it. It's actually you simply choosing, this is something that is a pattern. I can learn to work with it. You'll work with it only if you allow yourself to be at ease and to make the middle ground, so to also take into consideration the external. The adaptive child is there because people want the external to match what they want inside. And here's where Sadhguru quotes are what I want to share with you, because they're very good ones and pertain to our topic. So one is, if you identify with anything that you are not, you are moving from truth to untruth, from reality to hallucination. And I'm not sure if I've read these ones to you guys yet or not, but since some don't tune into all the sessions. The other one is, when there is no envy, jealousy, comparison, and competition within you, you can focus your full capabilities on doing what is needed. The inner world of you guys, the ego self, is always speaking to you. So when you're identifying with a definition of the self that comes from a time of being, again, a child, a teenager, and then starting to define the world, you can't have a different feeling connected to that. Is that fair to you? Does it change anything in your life? It keeps you in repeat patterns, charged, emotional, and mental. So instead, let's take that, again, ego self trait, and how about you choose a version of the adult you? It begins with self-worth and knowing that nobody is really perfect, and then it moves to what helps me to feel true to myself, but not a self that has a definition. You are you. The ego self, that is simply your name, if you want to refer. The sense of ease and knowledge that no, you're not perfect. Nobody is, and that's okay. But you can learn to find that group that you belong to, the ones that will love you in everything that you are. Here, the radical acceptance, the one sentence that I want to read from the book for you. Know that this card comes as a mirror to show you the divine within, and invite your radical acceptance of everything you consider beautiful or ugly in your being. The ego self is not ugly or beautiful, but there were times we all got yelled at, and those are the moments that we have stored as if they were quote unquote ugly. Same thing as you're growing up as a child, traits that got defined as ugly or teased. So that's where you want to start. And with humanity, if you're in storylines and keep on wanting to talk about things as good or bad, you're not going to help yourself to move into complete unconditional love for self or ego, because you're using your energy and focus on an enemy, which is humanity. Instead, when you gain your emotional maturity with the ego self, with your imperfections, that's when you're ready to be a grown up, when those things that happen are presented. And that would be any situation where you're interacting, and those traits of the ego self that you know can cause certain issues may, and it's not issues because of a negative thing. Like I gave you the example, I'm a talker. I ask a lot of questions. I'm very, very loving. Those traits have and continue to bring about in certain engagements with people, particularly new people or just people that obviously are their mindset is closed and only people behaving certain ways, so they're very rigid. The reaction is what it is. And when you're in a place though of ego self-worth, you're not offended. You're the adult, the functional adult in your body eyes, ventral vagal state. Because all that's happening is somebody is reacting in a charged state, because how you are doesn't match how they want you to be or how they want it to go. There's assumptions. We all have them. So take note again of your mind, your thought patterns around the ego self, around those traits. Allow yourself beyond this transmission video to engage with the emotional response, the mind. Notice what your story is. Are you your partner? Are you the inner critic? Disengage from the duality. Bring yourself to neutrality. And then ownership. Ownership with unconditional love towards you and the external. Begin to have mastery and adulthood in your emotional response to who you are. The ego self is going to be a part of you. Accept yourself fully. It's a beautiful self to be. And no, you're not perfect, nor is anybody else, and you will most likely annoy somebody or, have situations that are going to be, as the psychiatrist, I'm learning about avoidance, conflict avoidance. So majority of people have assumptions on conflict. Neither one are accurate. The part that it's awkward and always going to feel a bit awkward is what they're stating is natural. So we're not always going to be on the same page. You guys, those of you learning about being in your self-empowerment and then potentially choosing enlightenment in this 5D state, in this I can be me, and so being in the ventral vagal state, you're the ones who will no longer be reactive, but it takes first becoming your best partner. And having said that, I have now disconnected from you. I want you to take a minute to just ground in what we were talking about, to remember that your power lies within you. And moving forward, taking note of the ego self, where there are areas that rigidity is keeping you in a place that you don't want to be. to give it worthiness. It exists. It was a part of your journey for a reason, and to trust in you. I'm not going to bore you with the body information, the body element, but the nervous system and brain development, the psychoeducation, it's always leading to me knowing that anything we've done, the nervous system reacts to the lack of predictability with defensiveness. Our nervous system will store any trauma, because the trauma really is a overwhelming feeling that our brain wasn't able to process. And so we all have a different way that we'll get scared and or sad, really, really sad and more. And it began way back when. Now you have a lot of narratives and storylines that don't allow you to even notice the feeling. So just take it day by day, and you be the one to be aware of your inner power, and you allowing yourself to be the adult with the love for yourself is the first place, and it'll extend, disengaging from the stories and opening yourself up to the expanded version of you that you want to see. Thank you for joining, and see you guys in the next session.